Hello everyone and welcome back to the quarterfinals of the Chessable Masters Finals. It's Hikaru Nakamura versus Ding Liren, and this is the second game of the first match. The first game ended in a draw, and here Hikaru now has the white pieces. It's quite the game, so let's dive straight into it. Hikaru with the white pieces opens with e4. We have e5 from Ding, knight to f3, and knight to c6. Sorry about that. And bishop to b5. Hikaru goes for the Ruy Lopez, and the Ding goes for the Berlin defense. So knight f6, we have d3, and the bishop to c5. So it's going to be the standard main line of the Berlin. Bishop captures, we have d captures, and now just castles. And now black will do something about this e5 pawn that's under attack, so knight goes to d7. In the future, you might choose to play some like f6 and so on. So knight b to d2, preparing knight to c4 to put additional pressure to the pawn, and black castles. We have knight to c4, now black needs to guard this, and rook to e8. Which is the main move here. f6 is a known move, however it was only played in a handful of games. With a4, now preparing to expand further on the queen side with a4, a5, maybe c3, b4 and so on, and black prevents this by pushing a5. And here there are a few games where b3 was played. There's king to h1, also a known move, but h4, the move Hikaru plays, is a new move in the position, so already as of move 10 we have a completely new game. So let's see what happens. With knight to b6, Ding offers a trade of knights here, as it is a very strong knight, but also he kind of leaves the e5 pawn undefended. So it's very interesting what's happening here. Point is, if both of the knights capture the pawn, or at least if only one of them captures, let's say you go knight f captures here, then you will pick up this knight first, and then of course after this knight captures you lose the h4 pawn. So that's the idea. So it's not really a pawn sacrifice. Here we have knight back to e3, doesn't allow this, and now comes bishop captures on e3. And Hikaru doesn't recapture with the bishop, which seems reasonable, but the problem is if you recapture with the bishop, then bishop to g4 is very strong. And as you already pushed the pawn to h4, you don't have h3 to kick away the bishop, and this will be a very annoying pin pretty much for the rest of the game. So here instead Hikaru captures with the f pawn, nicely opens up the f file, and will be used for attacking and defensive purposes. And now bishop to g4 isn't really a problem, you can just unpin because the rook also defends the knight. So knight to d7, Ding now wants to shift the knight over to f6, and bishop to d2. Hikaru is preparing bishop to c3 to go after the e5 pawn this way, knight to f6, and now knight to h2, stopping any of the pieces from coming to g4, but also maybe preparing to infiltrate via these squares. So h5, not allowing any g4 plans from white, but also you can also use it as an outpost for your knight or the bishop. So queen to f3, and now queen to e7, putting more defense to the f7 pawn, so the knight can now move, as the queen and the rook battery were very annoying here. So bishop to c3, Hikaru remaneuvers the bishop to a more useful diagonal, and now c5. Ding also still has to decide how to develop his light square bishop. Will he go something like bishop to e6, maybe bishop to g4 in the future, or maybe b7, bishop to b7, and put the bishop on this diagonal. So b3 by Hikaru, and now knight to g4, saying, okay, you can capture here, and then I can develop my bishop to g4. Bishop back to e1, as also Ding is now just attacking the h4 pawn. So Hikaru just defends it, bishop to e1, and now rook to a6. And here Ding says that he's ready to attack Hikaru's king. He wants to shift the rook over to g6, and it will be a very strong rook. So bishop to g3, and now comes rook to g6. As planned, we have knight captures on g4. Otherwise, this knight will come to h6. This will open up the g file for the rook, and it could be a bit dangerous. So Hikaru decides to eliminate one of the attackers. Knight captures on g4. We have bishop captures with an attack on the queen, and queen f2. So rook to d8. In the future, you might be able to open up the d file, and also maybe you can also include this rook into the attack somehow. So king h2, getting the king to a safer square, and the b6 now. We have queen to d2, now with ideas of maybe infiltrating with the queen this way, maybe somehow, and f6 now, just defending the e5 pawn, and now the black queen can move as well. We have queen to c3, and now rook to d6. So bringing the other rook to the 6th rank as well. We have rook to f2 with ideas of maybe doubling up on the f-file, and king h7 binding. We have rook 8 to f1, and now bishop back to e6. So here you can see that the position is very closed, and it's not all that easy to make any sort of a breakthrough. It's not like completely closed. Breakthroughs are possible. At some point white might have d4 planned, black might have c6, b5 planned, so there are breakthroughs in the position. So rook f3, and now rook to g4 by Hikaru. Now black might have some ideas of maybe f5, rook captures here, maybe sacrificing the exchange to create some sort of an attack. So queen back to e1, adding more protection to the bishop, but also to the h4 pawn, and now queen back to e8. We have king back to h1, and now queen to g6. Now again, putting pressure on the bishop here. Queen f2, it's not really a problem. The bishop is well defended, and the queen back to e8 now. So rook to a1, Hikaru just asking Ding, what are you planning here? As Ding is the one who is pretty much dictating the tone of the battle, Hikaru can just wait and see what happens. And here Ding played king to g8. It was at some point that Hikaru, I think, offered the draw. I don't know in which position exactly, and Ding declined. Ding wanted to play the position on. And here Ding played king to g8. And it was in this moment that Magnus Carlsen tweeted a tweet regarding this position where he said that the black king landing on b7 for sure. Hashtag study chess. So Magnus claims that the king that now came to g8 is coming all the way to b7. So this is what Magnus says, that the king has to be brought all the way here if you want to push this game for something more. So we have bishop to h2. Hikaru wants to play rook g3, trade off a pair of rooks, and we have rook back to g6. Queen back to f1, and now queen to d7. We have rook to b1 by Hikaru, and rook to g4 now. Again, putting pressure on the h4 pawn, so rook to g3 now. Asking, do you want to trade rooks here? And now it seems like you could capture the pawn on h4. However, if you capture the pawn on h4, then queen captures on f6 is happening, as now you cannot capture due to the pin, and also, well, the rook is under attack, so you don't want to allow white any tricks like this. So Ding captures, we have rook captures on g3, we have bishop captures on g3, and now bishop to g4. So Ding still waiting for with his king march. We have rook back to a1, and now queen to e6. We have queen to f2. Hikaru just has to wait and see. And now Ding starts the king march, king to f7. So let's see if he does what Magnus tweeted about. We have rook back to f1, and now king to e8. We have queen back to e1, and now king to d7. We have queen to c3, and now king to c8. We have king to g1, and now king to b7. It's as if Ding saw Carlsen's tweet, and the king does land on b7. So rook to f2 by Hikaru, and now queen back to e8. We have rook to f1. Hikaru just has to wait and see what happens, and queen to g6 now. We have king to h2, and now bishop back to e6, preparing to bring the queen over to g4. We have queen to e1, and now queen to g4. So what is Ding's plan here? We have queen back to c3 by Hikaru, and bishop back to d7 now. We have queen back to e1, Hikaru just repeats, and bishop to c6 now. Now you have to be careful if you place the queen somewhere like d1 or d2, then bishop captures here is an option, since the pawn will not be able to recapture. So queen to f2, and now rook back to d8. We have rook to a1, and now rook to h8. So pretty much just using every possible resource to give Hikaru a potential opportunity to blunder something. So here Hikaru offers a queen trade, Ding declines. Queen back to e6, and now rook back to f1. We have queen to e2, first rook to h6, and now queen to e2, and now queen back to e8. So still nothing really going on. We have queen back to d1, and now we have rook to h8 by Ding. We have bishop to e1, and now bishop to d7. We have king to h1, and now queen to g6. So something has to happen, or if, they just keep repeating moves, then it's going to be a draw by 50 move rule. I don't know if they have such a rule in online chess, but I mean, I'm pretty sure they do. Why wouldn't they? So king to h2, and now rook to d8. For those of you who don't know the 50 move rule, if nothing happens over the course of 50 moves, then it's a draw. And by nothing happens, I mean if no pieces are captured, no pawns are captured, or no pawns are pushed. So bishop to g3, just repeating, and here queen to g4. Now it's Ding who offers a queen trade, and Hikaru happily exchanges. So queen captures with bishop captures, and now king to g1. So how will Ding do anything to try and push for more than a draw here? Ding goes c6. So he says that he might be interested in going b5. Rook to a1 by Hikaru. If b5 is played, captures, captures, you want to have the a5 pawn undefended, so Ding just defends it. We have rook to a8, and now bishop back to e1. We have b5 by Ding, and now king to f1. Hikaru also starts bringing his king into the game. King to b6, and now bishop to c3. We have b4, pushing the bishop back, and now bishop to b2. And now with the position again closed on the queen side, again, it's very hard to see what Ding is interested in doing here. So rook back to d8 by Ding, and now king to e1. We have king to c7. Now Ding shifts the king back into the center. King to d2, and now king to d6. We have rook back to f1, and now king to e6. We have king to e1, again, just repeating, and rook to g8 now. Here, Ding is preparing g5, as this is, well, aside from f5, the only breakthrough he has in the position. So king f2, and now he goes for it, the g5. Hikaru trades, captures, captures, and now king to g3. Ding wants to play h4 here, so Hikaru stops it with the king. Now if h4, you just gobble up the bishop. So rook back to d8 by Ding, and here rook to f2. And now a very interesting attempt by Ding. He pushes c4 here, and c4 is very interesting because if you capture with this pawn, then these two pawns are extremely weak, and you also free up the d file to be used for your rook. So Hikaru instead goes b captures on c4, but now c5. And again, what Ding managed to do here is that he successfully created a weak a4 pawn, and you might be able to use the bishop to attack it somehow. Maybe you can move the king, bring the bishop here, attack it this way. Or maybe you can attack it from behind, we'll see. So here Hikaru goes rook to d2. Now he says he might be interested in maybe some c3, d4 action, but now just rook to c8 by Ding. And here the position is, well, very calm. Nothing is actually happening here, and Hikaru should just repeat moves as he did basically for the entire game. Something like rook to f2, maybe rook back to d2, king h2, or something. But here Hikaru played bishop to a1, and it seems like it's the same thing. You just want to bring the bishop back and forth. However, this move loses the game for white. It's weird, but it does. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find the winning move for Ding while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on realizing that the bishop on a1 is undefended, and this is what makes black's next move possible. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's rook to f8. Rook to f8 with the bishop being on b2 would not be as potent, because now when the rook comes to f1, you already have an attack on the bishop. So that's the problem here. And the problem is you don't have rook f2 to prevent Ding's rook from infiltrating because of h4 check. And now the king has to move, and you win the rook here on f2. Well, the exchange, basically. So after rook to f8, Hikaru tried c3, but now Ding just goes in with the rook. Rook to f1, the bishop here on a1 is now under attack. You have to defend it, bishop to b2, and now comes bishop to d1 as the rook from f1 nicely defends the bishop, which attacks the a4 pawn, which will create some pass pawns on the queen side. So here Hikaru played d4, but now here Ding just played h4 with check. You cannot go to h3. If king h3, then rook to h1 is checkmate, as both of these squares are nicely covered, so the king has nowhere to go. So instead Hikaru played king to h2, but here Ding just played g4, and it was in this position on move 80 that Hikaru Nakamura resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Whatever you do, it's just game over. Let's say you try d5 check, king d6, and now any move, like really, like you could try giving up the exchange, but that endgame is still lost. So let's say any other move just results in g3 check, king h3 only move, and rook to h1 is checkmate. So really awesome stuff. Ding really squeezed the water out of stone in this one, and well, Hikaru defended perfectly well, but at some point where he needed to just to defend the moves here, with anything except bishop to a1, he played bishop to a1. It's just amazing. But that's the point. Ding tried for like 60 moves to try and get Hikaru to make one small inaccuracy. He did it, and Ding took advantage of that and won the game. So really a brilliant game. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Mark Epstein, Jordan Koch, Marco Ludecki, Raj Par, and Thomas Mumford for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. It's also Thomas's birthday, so I wish you all the best, you know, in life and also over the chessboard. So yeah, thank you all. I will see you soon and have an excellent rest of your day.